Okay, we'll call this work session to order.
Oh, I thought he was on
We
vacation.
have one topic of discussion tonight, and that's about our policies for the homeless camp. Spencer, it's all yours.
Okay, appreciate this opportunity. I think we're as anxious as anyone to get moving on this and make some changes. So following our council meeting last week, I don't know what we're called for a task force or a committee or something like that, but not the four of us here because Chief was out of town, but myself, Jeff Laurie, Ed, and Paul Knock, and then Guy Knight representing Chief got together for a number of things. One is to review many of the policies that we've wanted to change and have been discussing. And the other was we met out on the site to look at the existing conditions at the public works site and what we think would work and what we'd recommend. So based on all of that, we have put the following information together. Kim, I have a document I printed out, a couple pages that summarizes some of these things. I printed them out and they're sitting on my desk. If you want to get a copy for everyone that's here, that'd be great. All right, so let me go through.
Ready to start?
What's that?
Ready to share that?
Yeah. You're on the next one? Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about the current policies as a reminder for what we are doing. We're going to talk about the issues and problems with the current location and with enforcement. We're going to talk about some proposed changes that we would like to see at the new public works site. We'd like to discuss some immediate actions that we believe we can take at the current site while we work towards the new site. And then we want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we discovered when we were out on the public works site and bring those back. So that's where we are. Okay, so here are some of the guiding principles and objectives. So the purpose, again, of these policies is for improved management and enforcement of the homeless camp at the new public works location. And the other purpose is some immediate action to improve the current conditions. And here were the priorities that we were looking at. One is we want to be better neighbors and reduce the impact on neighboring properties. Two, we want to enhance the effectiveness of our enforcement. Three, we want to improve the living conditions of those within the camp. Four, we want to ensure the safety and well-being of all involved. That's not just our campers, but our staff, service providers, and neighbors. And then last, we want the policies to incentivize and encourage the acceptance of services. So one of the lenses that we want to look through these policies is a particular policy enabling them or helping them to improve their situation. We don't want to be the reason that someone doesn't accept services. And there's some of that happening today. In fact, that is a problem that Officer Knock has mentioned, is that people are declining services offered to them because they're comfortable where they are. And we don't think that's in the city's interest nor in that person's interest.
Could I, if you could go back, could I ask that we add one phrase to the purpose of the updated policies? And that's the management and enforcement of the current homeless camp as well as the new public works location.
Yeah, I think he was encompassing both.
Yeah,
Was the intent.
But it only,
Says immediate actions.
okay, at current site, okay. I just want to make sure we don't
Sure.
forget we're doing stuff at the current site as well.
No. Okay, let's do a quick review. We have a permit process. It's a free permit obtained by the city, obtained from the city. It's good for 3 weeks and is renewable. Camp closures. So when we do any kind of move out or clean up, we notify everyone with at least 24 hours notice. I think our practice has been 72 hours notice, just to be sure. But Paul will go out probably each day prior to that.
And doesn't the 72-hour notice then enable us to, if anything's left behind, we can just get rid of it because we've given them that required 72 hours
I think the
notice?
72-hour notice goes back to the state law that requires if there's an established camp, you have to give them that much notice until you have them removed. So this covers that. With respect to anything left, my understanding is if there are things of value, we still need to retain them, but if for 30 days. But if it's junk, unsanitary, things like that, obviously it can't be used again. We just immediately dispose of it. Is that
Correct.
right? Okay. So we talked about this at the last meeting. We started with daily move out, then went to weekly, and then really went to over the winter on a as needed basis. So right now the language says the closure is determined by the city manager or designee, and we do those for inspection and for cleaning. The camper responsibilities, they must vacate the site. They may need to remove tents, vehicles, and other items. I think if we have the may in there is permissible so that, as an example, we decide we need to clean up a camp, but it is raining or other weather conditions. We may, if their site is in good condition, not require them to take it all down and set up later. Sometimes, or often, that can lead to worse conditions.
And we can vary the, I'm going to call it enforcement or the requirement based on how well they've followed the rules that have been set forth already.
Yeah, I think what we've been seeing, we've had a number of full camp cleanouts, but not as often as targeted ones. So if there's a particular person, really we're mostly talking about people with accumulation of junk and a mess. If there is a particular problematic person, then we will do a targeted cleanup for that person and require them to move, whereas someone that's containing their goods and stuff like that, we would not require them to move out. And that helps incentivize the good behavior, if you will. At the same time, at some point, we do want kind of everyone to be realizing that this is meant to be temporary. So at some point, we do want to have everyone moving out. And we'll come to that. Okay, other site rules. So campers are assigned a specific space by city staff. There's a lot of problems with that I'll come back to in a minute. Mm-hmm. I think if you recall, our original desire was to build platforms or something like that on the site. There were two issues. One, we wanted to move them out quickly from the previous Mill Pond site. And the second thing is when we created the new camper on the recycling yard, at that time, we believed we were going to be moving to a more permanent site across the street on Aldermill. And so we did not want to spend a whole lot of money for that site if we were going to be moving across. And that's when we came up with the idea for the eco blocks instead of platforms. And then that morphed into the public works yard. And so waiting until we had firm direction on, say, a more permanent site is kind of what we were waiting for. So right now, it started out with spray paint on the ground of different areas, but you can imagine with our weather, that doesn't last very long. We had some access restrictions, so only permit holder, city staff, and authorized service providers and visitors that are authorized by the city manager are allowed in the designated camping areas. That's proved problematic, and I'll come back to that. Furniture and structures, no large furniture, couches, full-size mattresses, for example, is permitted, and no structures other than tents are allowed. Tarps and pallets can be used as a base. I will say, what we saw over this last year at the recycling yard site is much, much better than what was in the mill ponds the previous year, where people had different rooms. I'm not sure they were quite 2 stories yet, but they were, they grew quite a bit. And so my observation is, well, there was a lot more accumulation of stuff, and I think people expanded their footprint more than we intended. It was vastly reduced from the previous year in the mill pond site. And we'll come back to that. It contains fire regulations. I think you can use a camp stove, but you can't have an open flame like a fire pit or anything like that. We had some rules on that you have to contain your stuff within your tent. You can't have a storage tent, which is what people were previously doing. And you had to keep everything inside with a few exceptions for a bicycle, wagon, things like that.
Do we regulate the size of the tent that they can have? Because you could have one 8x10 or one 10x20, leaving part of it for storage.
I think it's been more judgment call. I don't think we've turned anyone away that I'm aware of that's had too big of a tent. That is one of the reasons why we want to go to a designated site with more of a hard boundary. Is you can use up all the space, but you don't get any more space than that. We did talk about other items would be removed. Again, with the current site, that's been problematic, and I'll come back to that. And then there are currently dog regulations, such as must be on leash and control their barking and things like that.
So we don't say nothing about shots or?
No, but that is what's being proposed in the new policy, and I'll come to that.
And do we say how long a leash is allowed? There's leashes and there's leashes.
I don't think we get that into that specifics, but we can add that.
The dog just have to stay within the camp?
Well, I would have a problem with saying the dog has to stay within the camp, because if I was a camper there, I wouldn't want to be there if there were dogs, because I'm very afraid of dogs. So you're looking at both the camper with the dog and the campers who don't have dogs. And we do say only dogs. We don't say you can have cats or ducks or.
I think the only, what I would do at the new site is require the dog to remain within that particular camper's assigned site, and then be on leash anytime. Well, I think they would need to be on leash, but with on leash with the owner anytime they're outside of that. Okay, so the consequence of violations. So right now is a citation process. So they're issued citation, and then that goes through the court system. And the current language says that 3 offenses constitute a public nuisance, and then there's potential denial of participation in the program and abatement from the campsite. And we have been able to use that for some of the more egregious offenders. I've designated that to chief, so Paul will make a recommendation, but the final decision is up to chief. And how many do you think we have suspended either temporarily or permanently from the camp, do you think, in the last year?
Several, I don't have a good number. Probably have that on.
But it is the worst offenders, which creates another problem, is the worst offenders are then in other locations. But we've talked about some possible solutions there that I'll come to. Okay, so here, like I said, here are some of the issues we have with the current system. So the first one is, and this is a big one, the citation process doesn't work, flat out. They frequently do not appear in court, and I don't believe we've received a single payment for a citation in the 2 years we've been here. We've been doing this program. And then it's the impact on the court system. So it creates a significant administrative burden to the court and just really leads to ineffective enforcement, delays, and increased court costs. And I think many of you remember we had a particularly difficult camper who was very aggressive with staff and others, who was issued a citation, and when he did show up in court, and it's there because it's going through the court, they have the ability to plead not guilty. They can request a public defender. They can request a jury trial. All of these things for this, and in some case, I think the camper indicated he couldn't make the next court date because he would be on vacation in California. There's a lot wrong with that sentence. But what you'll see is we want to get this out of the court system completely. Current problems with the current site. So we really don't have a good way of delineating specific campsites. Spray paint, as I mentioned, doesn't last. The tents are, they're right up against each other. So it's difficult to enforce boundaries and accumulation of junk. So this is a picture, an example of a picture that Paul took during one of his inspections. And what we find often is everyone just says it's not theirs. Mm-hmm. And so you don't know who to hold accountable. And so that's not working. And then we have the issues of unauthorized access. So you'll see right now we currently have access off of Avenue S and access off of Alder Mill on the south side of the recycling yard. And that makes it nearly impossible for us to enforce the no unauthorized access. If a police officer came in one side, people just duck out the other side. And it's not like you need to leave. You just, as long as you're on the sidewalk, you're where you're supposed to be. So it's not like they need to go far. And then, of course, I think we've talked a little bit about just the proximity to the recycling yard is problematic. It's both that they collect, our campers collect a lot of junk, and two, that people have more and more been dumping stuff at that location knowing the homeless will take it. So they'll take it, cause problems, and then we end up having to clean it up.
In the time that we are prepping Avenue B, and we're enforcing on Avenue S, can we block the entrance at Avenue S so that you only have a one-way in, one-way out, like we're going to have on Avenue V?
Sure. I think we can look at it. I don't know currently if it would cause any fire code issues. We believe the Avenue V, the entrances and exits will be wide enough that the access will be easy, that one way in, one way out should be sufficient. I don't know if that's the case at this site, especially with how crowded everything is. Mm-hmm. The other issue is along Avenue S is currently the fencing goes right, or the gate goes right to the property line, and the space is between our property line and Doc's Auto. Right. And so now I'm assuming he'd be more than happy to give us permission to fill in that gap. So we can reach out to him, but we would want to ensure that we're not creating any increased level of danger to the campers.
I'd like to make sure we look at that.
Yeah.
And in the recycling yard, do we have any signs that say dumping sofas, furniture, etc. is prohibited and you will be fined if you're caught doing it?
I believe there are signs there that talk about what's acceptable to be dumped there or put there, but I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but I believe there is something there that says don't be fined.
And that's one thing that the current camp is lacking, again, is good signage. That just comes back to waiting for the permanent location, putting all our efforts and money there.
I think we could still do signage once we decide what our rules are gonna be.
I agree. So we've had challenges with the move outs. We do have people that refuse to leave. They just say no and give me the citation, and Paul can give them all the citations they want. Lots of stuff just gets left behind, lots of personal belongings. One of the problems that we even encounter is people are so generous in giving tents and sleeping bags that many of them just find it's easier to leave the ones in there, have us clean it up, and then get new ones. It's less work, and they get new stuff, and so that's problematic. And again, just the amount of junk that's collected. Again, you can see a picture here. This is actually of a site from one of our campers who ultimately was expelled from the camp. Here's a couple other pictures just to give you an idea of the accumulation that we're seeing in the proximity of all the tents. This was not what we envisioned, but under the current site organization and how it's built, it's just we've been unable to enforce.
I'm curious, do we have the space in the current location that instead of painting lines, that we could actually put the cement blocks?
I'm gonna come to that.
Okay, thank you.
So let's go through some of the proposed changes. This is kind of after brainstorming, but not just what we did this week, but what we've been working on we kind of have a running list of things. So the first is we need to change our enforcement methods. So we take it out of the court system, and really we just adopt our camp rules. And violation of those rules leads to suspension from the camp. At the end of the day, suspension from the camp is the real, that's the really only thing that we can enforce that would matter to them. Giving them a paper ticket or other things clearly doesn't do anything. And that will also clear up a lot of the court's time and just administrative time for our officers who write the citations. It takes some time to do that, and again, they don't do anything.
And how long a suspension would that be?
So one of the things I have on here is on a different slide. One of the things I would like to do is actually develop the guidelines. I think we have an understanding between the chief, I, and Paul of we're trying to be consistent. However, I believe if we adopt actual guidelines, if we do receive a challenge that we're being unfair or too hard, too easy on someone, that if we have those guidelines, I think our argument will be strengthened. So that's one of the things that we want to develop, probably just solidifying what we do now. Typically it has to do with the severity of the issue and the number of times we've had issues. So we've given permanent suspensions for violence and attacks and things like that. And we've given more temporary ones where it's been more clutter and things like that. Any other thoughts you have, Chief, on how we've been enforcing that?
But there are some things that might happen in the camp that would be a citation, such as violence leading to an attack.
Yeah, so anything, any illegal
That's it.
activity would still be enforced under the criminal law. We just wouldn't necessarily,
Right.
we would be able to run both. It would be a violation of camp rules and criminal. So we could take immediate action on the camp rule violations. Separate from that, allow any illegal activity to go through the court system.
And we would be keeping a record of, what do we call them? They're not citations, they're,
Camp violations.
Violation.
Rule
Camp
violations. Yeah.
well, but keeping a record of who's getting them and
Yeah, we'll
how
have-
many somebody
We'll
gets.
have a case, not a case file, we'll have a record of each camper, and we'll have
Right.
notes in there on each citation or things like that.
So Knox tracking that stuff now, and
Yeah.
oftentimes when he comes to me saying, hey, we like to consider this a nuisance because of all the violations. He knows my first question's gonna be out to him is, you know, what have we done in the past with this particular type of violations? And he comes back and tells me, yeah, they've been contacted X amount of times, so-and-so. Same thing with nuisance vehicles running around town where they're, and it's just, as long as they've been warned several times, he keeps track of that, then I give him permission to go ahead and abate the problem, so.
Good deal.
I should note that when we talk about new policies, all of these need to be, we need to get our city attorney to buy off on them. Some of these I think are all pretty straightforward. Others probably need a closer look at from our city attorney. So my goal was to basically get a draft together that both the staff and the council like, and then take it to our attorney once we have that. And if she has changes, then we'll kind of go from there. So one of the ones that will need that scrutiny is immediate disposal of items outside campsites. And what I mean by that is if they've got their designated sites with the eco blocks, and we find anything outside of that we're basically calling everything a roadway. So you'll have Avenue V, there'll be a loop around for public safety vehicles, public works vehicles to go around to inspect and do other things. Anything in there, we'd like to designate the area somehow as a fire lane or something like that, and we need to keep it clear. And so there isn't we hold it for a certain amount of time, it's just immediate disposal.
You could consider it abandoned.
Yeah, it wouldn't be subject to the 30 days holding for items of value. We would still need to do that for inside the camp to be inside the person's designated area, but we tell them ahead of time anything left out here. At the same time, we also don't want, one of the things we've discovered, so there were some communications a few weeks ago or maybe a week or two ago about the access to the current camp off of Avenue S. We had a resident concerned that kind of emergency access was blocked with debris. Interestingly enough, our staff had cleaned it out on Thursday. By Saturday, it was filled up again, and so we went back the next week and cleaned it out again. And within the same day, it started accumulating stuff again. And one of the things we're discovering is it's almost like a service we're providing. They can, anything they don't want to have to do the work to dispose of, they just throw it into the access area, and then staff will clean it up for them. So again, that's something, a behavior we'll want to address. And if we have the video system, we can address it that way. They're gonna find ways, and so we just have to keep on top of that. We want the ability to trespass individuals due to rule violations. So if someone gets suspended from the camp, we want the ability to also trespass them from the campsite property for the same amount of time. That just gives us an added level of enforcement ability if we do find them back in the camp. And some, when we've suspended them, leave the area, others hang around, and there are several campers who've been suspended from the current camp who are still in their daily or hanging out on the sidewalk next to it and stuff like that. So we want more tools and teeth to be able to enforce them staying out of the camp.
The end of that sentence puzzled me. It said trespass individuals who are suspended from the camp or found camping in prohibited areas.
So in my presentation, I split that up, so I'm gonna come back to the second part. Yeah. So again, another rule that we need to put in there is we have some that like to get in the way of our employees trying to do their job, threatening people and stuff like that. So adding language to that, again, all these would be rule violations leading to suspension. We would not allow any access on Avenue V with the exception of approved service providers such as Clatsop Behavioral Health, Clatsop Community Action, the Bob Team, public safety vehicles, Public Works.
And would we issue them some sort of permit that they put on their car so that anybody in passing
Like
knows?
a door hanger or something like
Yeah.
that. It should be obvious, you know, for someone like Paul, he knows who they all are, he recognizes them. The other reason we don't want any parking on Avenue V is, this location will make it a little bit easier, you know, during the night and stuff like that, for patrol vehicles to go by. They can easily look down Avenue V as they're passing, get a good idea, and basically if any vehicle's in there after hours, we're almost guaranteed that it's not someone who should be there, and we're gonna make it really uncomfortable for someone. Let's say we have someone who wants to go buy or sell drugs in the camp. They are either gonna have to take the risk of parking where they shouldn't, and it's gonna be really obvious, or parking somewhere else and walking a long ways in an area that's clearly signed that they're prohibited from entering. And so, again, hopefully that dissuades people from going in there who shouldn't be in there. So unauthorized visitors would be trespassed. So if we do find someone in there, we would trespass them. And if one of our campers is hosting a non-authorized person, that would be a violation of our rules, and we build that into what those consequences are. So it give them some responsibility. We have some campers who from time to time fail to move back into the camp. When they move out, they stay out for a few days, and so that's just another one we want to put in. And when I say failure to move back, that just means that they're now camping illegally. On our camp closures, we would again have a hard deadline. We give them a day and a time. I think we all recognize, because of our inability to enforce things through the court very effectively, and the citation writing process being really ineffective, there are those who we give them a 9 o'clock deadline to be moved out, and 10 or 11 o'clock, and they're still in bed and haven't started anything. Oh yeah, let me get on that. And I think with stricter enforcement and not needing to go through the courts, we just, they're gonna learn through us being stricter with that. In some cases, we might give them, you know, we might actually close it for a couple of days to give Public Works more time and not rushing through it. But we stick with hard deadlines, and then anything left at that deadline, again, is subject to, we'd say, call it abandoned or otherwise, and immediate disposal. Again, something our city attorney would have to sign off on. Some of this overlaps, but again, permitted items, a tent, tarp, bike, wagon, and a folding camp chair would be appropriate and fine outside of their tents. I think it's one tent per assigned, I think it'd be site. If there is.
If you have two people living in a tent, you want to give them one chair per person.
Yeah, and they could have 2 bikes or something like that, but one person assigned to there certainly couldn't have 3 bikes and bike parts from 10 different bikes and things like that. Prohibited items, and this is a continuation, but furniture, any canopies, other structures. Then the other thing is we want to put a prohibition on any structures, tents, or anything above 8 feet, since that's the height of the fence. We don't want anything going up higher than the fence. We think that will help reduce the visibility of the camp. We would not allow tarps to be greater than 12 by 16. And currently we have an issue with some really large tarps that are covering more than one tent, more than one site, and so it would have to be contained to that individual's site. And
so
then,
can I ask about the difference between tarps and canopies? Now, to me, a canopy is one of those things that has its legs already and has the, and those are typically, they could be used for the same purpose that tarps are used, to cover the tent. So I guess I would not like to see that, I would like to see maybe one tarp or one canopy per tent.
We're trying to say no canopies because you can't secure them very well.
Okay.
And so it becomes a safety issue for other campers that they can just get picked up. And so they serve the same purpose, and we prefer them to use a tarp. And most of them do anyway. And so we've had some luck in enforcing this, although I think there's probably been some.
How are people securing the tarps then? Because you have to have some sort of legs, you have to have some rope. You have
So it's
to
no real legs. Both the tents and tarps, as you can see in, we lose the screen.
Just 1 second.
On the last item, that those would be able to be tied to the eco block. So nothing can be on those eco blocks, with the exception of they have a little,
they have a-
yeah,
Yeah.
that they can
iron thing.
attach to it. And if they wanted to put stakes in the ground as well, they could do
Where
that.
did you want to go back to?
Permitted and prohibited items. There we go. So that's the benefit of the eco
understand.
blocks, that they can tie that down.
Any thoughts about being able to tie things off or attach to the fencing?
I don't think we put that on there, but I don't think, we want anything on the fence. I mean,
I think
they'll
you're
defer.
right.
Any thoughts on that?
Because the other thing I've seen is not just attached to the fencing, but being flopped over the top of the fencing. And,
Defeats the purpose of screening and
Especially
things like that.
yes,
I've seen it.
yes.
It'd be outside the eco block to be able to reach the fence anyway, so.
Right.
I don't know if we'll have eco blocks on the exterior perimeter. It will be the fence. I think the bigger thing for me
The
is,
fencing is not there as a structure for anybody to use.
yeah, and I would say it is, I don't care as much as long as it can't be seen from the other side of the fence. So if something's touching the inside, I'm not sure I care.
No,
But
I mean,
flopping
tied on
over,
to or
hanging on,
causing stress to the.
yeah, tying off of.
Yeah,
So we can work on some language for that. And that is one of the complaints we've recently been receiving. Okay, camp operations and management. Okay, city, and, I thought I made some changes, but it's showing up. Maybe they didn't save or something. So some of this is gonna overlap. Some of this is inside the camp, some of this is outside the camp. I thought I moved all the outside camp stuff to another section, but citywide park hours. So one of the things that we want to do is uniformly throughout the city create hours when no one is permitted in the camps, or sorry, in the parks. We currently have quite a few signs throughout the city that say no overnight camping. We want to change that to no overnight parking. Difficulty in that is someone can say, well, I'm not here overnight, I'm just here from 2 to 4 a.m. or something.
Exactly.
What we want to do is close down our parks from a certain hour, let's say it's 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. That way, if we find anyone in the park, they're in violation. So that gives us more enforcement when we do find people elsewhere. The other thing that we want to do is designate certain areas as natural parks, such as along our rivers and places like that. So throughout the city, you just can't be in any of those locations after a certain time.
And I think 11 p.m. is too late. The latest that it stays light here anytime during the year is about 10 p.m. So I would not want to go any later than 10, and sometimes
Yeah.
even earlier.
We'll review it. I just kind of
Yeah.
threw that out there. David's got a question.
I was just going to comment that I think 10 is too early. We do stay late actually during the summer till about 10:30. And there's also, if we're going to do along rivers and things like that, there is crabbing and stuff like that would happen, during overnight hours. So I think we need to be careful with that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater on that one.
We will research kind of what's a standard park hours, and then we'll go back and see, does that work for us or not? Again, the main point here isn't to prohibit people from using the parks late or using the parks early. The real thing we're trying to target is the overnight, the continual overnight presence in the parks.
And you would want to have that also dovetailing with our noise ordinances. After a certain time of night, you're not supposed to have noise beyond whatever.
That's always more difficult
That's
to
more
enforce.
difficult,
What's
that's true.
easier is, you're not supposed to be here and we found you here. So another thing that we've discussed is designating our homeless camp, the recycling center area, and all city parks as drug-free zones. Chief doesn't know about this. This is something we talked about while he was gone. And that allows for a harsher punishment and for better enforcement. Do you want to explain what goes into a drug-free zone? I think our downtown core is a drug-free zone today.
All it is if you're found in possession of drugs, you can be cited one just for the offense, let's say, but then you're also given a form basically saying that you are excluded from this particular area. In this case, it's the downtown drug-free area, which is typical prom to First Avenue, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's a 90-day prohibition. You can be arrested for criminal trespass if you do there. It's been somewhat successful over the years, especially my first several years here. We used it quite frequently, and then it's with the drug laws that have come around here in the last several years, it hasn't been, but we've recently used it, I think, late last summer with somebody that was downtown using drugs. One of the downtown business people got him on video and everything doing a drug transaction, and we used it during that. And I think it's a great idea.
So again, more teeth. This is not something that we need to allow to permit to happen within our camp.
Be done by a city, basically whatever reasonable place we want to make it.
Yeah.
You know, like around schools, for instance, it's obvious.
I think the schools currently are drug-free zones, right?
A little different than
And
our
isn't
ordinance, but yes.
SCPRD as well?
It'd be
They have
enhanced
some?
on the offense type of thing when you would have been cited for that, but it didn't act the exact same way as the DFC with that. My understanding is just a city ordinance that was put into place for us to be able to use. It was in service before I started here, so.
Did you say it was enhanced during events?
No, it would be like it's kind of like speeding in a work zone or a school zone or something. There's enhanced fines that would probably come with that, but I don't believe our ordinance necessarily is the same as what you're referring to as this is a
And
drug-free.
what he's talking about is
zone.
by the schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we think, and you saw in Paul's message, that we believe monthly move out is probably the right balance of getting people out, getting the site cleaned up, not creating a sense of entitlement to a particular location, and a kind of reminder that this is temporary, while at the same time not being overly burdensome on staff who it takes a lot of time and effort. I mean, right now, Ed, when we do a full camp clear out, I think it's a full day process, isn't it, just about?
To do multiple camps, or are you talking about just one?
The whole camp?
The whole
The
camp.
whole camp?
Have you been here since we've done a whole camp?
I don't think.
No, but I imagine that process is gonna take more than a full day.
So the recent ones we've done, how many campsites have we, moved out, and kind of how long did that take? How many staff resources?
The longest we've been there for one particular camp, that was pretty messy. There were 3 of us there for a total of about an hour and a half. And then another
That was for
about
one
45
campsite?
One campsite.
Well, what we were doing when we had the daily or weekly move-outs was that they had to be out of the campground by, I believe, 9 in the morning, and they could return at 4:30.
Yeah. So I think we want to have the monthly move outs because, again, there shouldn't be this entitlement feeling that, you know, this is my home now, and this is where I can stay for as long as I want. David?
Yep. As part of that, I think we should change the site that they are in at those move outs so that nobody feels like they've got the best site or they've got the worst site. The sites will move on that monthly basis.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that keeps them, hey, this is temporary, this isn't your spot.
And I agree with that. I think that lends us then to be looking at, instead of 3-week permits, because your permit tells you what site you can have. I really would like to see us do 1-week permits that people, because, and you also have in here, require campers to check in with CCA on a weekly basis. I think every week you have to check in, you have to renew or not get your permit renewed. And if that's the week that everybody has to leave and you come back, that's the week that you are gonna have your campsite changed.
We'll talk about that and come back. I think my only concern with the 1 week is if it doesn't change anything, it may just become more of an administrative burden to keep doing that each week. We anticipate that CCA will be issuing those permits, and I don't know if Chief can talk about, I don't know what's involved in the actual issuing. Maybe that's easy.
I don't believe it's much.
I just don't know.
It's not much, but it also is an opportunity to remind the person, in the last week, you've had this many demerits, whatever. And if you get this many more, you're gonna be leaving, so, you know, clean up your act,
Yeah,
so to
I will say, I
speak.
think our hope is that's happening on a regular basis anyways, as we have a consistent number of times our service providers are in the camp and are making contact.
But if you don't have it written as a guideline or a rule for us to follow, you open yourself up to camper A saying, well, you're always coming after me and telling me this, but you don't often go over to that person and tell them that.
Yeah,
But if everybody has to follow the same stuff, then we can't be accused of not being fair.
Yeah, I think that's where you have up here the consistent, I say suspension guidelines, it's really consistent rule enforcement.
My concern with 7 days is that it just won't get done. It's 7 days is so quick, it'll just come around, and I think that it probably won't happen consistently. And so if we do 30 days, that seems something that's actually doable. We completely move them out of the camp, they shuffle everything
Well, I'm
around.
not saying 7 days move out.
I just mean even executing, even getting a permit for every camper every 7 days, I just don't see that
And
actually
maybe,
happening.
just brainstorming here a little bit, but maybe if we have a particular date that we want to, let's say, for example, we say, we're gonna do a monthly move out, it's always gonna be on the first of the month, or the first weekday of the first of the month, so if it falls on the weekend. Let's say it's the first of the month, maybe the idea is you're issued a permit that gets you through the end of whatever month you start, but that everyone's permit expires at the same time, and expires at the same time we do the camp cleanup, and then you can get a new permit as part of that process.
Which means some people will get 30-day permits and some people will get 10-day permits.
But the length really doesn't matter, because if they qualify to get in and they haven't broken any rules, they qualify to get another permit. So if a camper's following the rules and the permit expires, they just get a new permit. So it's not like one for 7 days is any different for one than 14 days or 21 days if they're just getting a new permit as soon as it expires. So the length is probably inconsequential, especially if we have campers that are following all the rules and policies. I don't know if it does
Maybe
anything.
they're following all the rules and policies, but they're not doing anything to look for other kinds
Well,
of.
yeah, and that's where I think we want to put our emphasis, and she'll know. So moving on, after the monthly move out requirement, we have a service acceptance requirement. So that is, if they have an opportunity to go elsewhere, they are required to take that. They can't use our camp as their kind of, I was gonna say safety school, but that sounds bad, as their backup or their preference. I want to be here. I don't want to go to the Columbia or to Helping Hands or something like that. And especially if we have Clatsop Community Action as a service provider helping with the management of the camp, they're in a position to know what's been offered and to say, look, if they turn it down, then they are suspended from the camp. Clear signage of all the camp rules, especially for entering the camp, but also for the campers in there. That will just help with our enforcement and any challenge to our enforcement holding up. Right now, we'd like to kind of try out just prohibiting vehicle camping completely. I think Paul said there's only 2 right today in our camp. I don't believe we have an obligation to provide a place for someone in a vehicle, but if someone in a vehicle is homeless, we can provide them one of the spots in the camp if that's what they choose.
And then
I have a
go ahead.
I have a question for the chief on this one. So when I drove down the Oregon coast, almost every city has a place outside of town that they basically let people pull over for the night, clearly in camp. Newport, Cannon Beach, every city has a spot. Is there anywhere in Seaside that if you guys find a vehicle in town and they just have no place to stay, let's say everything's booked, is there some place they could go outside of town that you guys tell them?
Oh.
Are you talking about like people experiencing homelessness, or are you talking about
No, just anybody.
vacationers?
There's people that just live in vans, there's people that have buses, there's people that are just in town and don't have a hotel.
Or people that are driving a long way and are tired and for safety reasons want to pull over and sleep.
And I think that's one of the things over the years that we've been trying to, when you talk to them, it's like, hey, I'm super tired or whatever, you know, and I'm heading to California or whatever. And, you know, we usually are like, okay, we do have a city ordinance, no overnight camping in your cars and all that kind of stuff somewhere. As far as telling them where to go, no. You know, I don't like the idea that, oh yeah, just go up to Gearhart and, you know, use their property no differently than we don't like them doing that to us. And so I usually tell them, look, once you get outside of the city limits, you know, you're out in the county, you're on a state highway, if there's a wide spot over there, you know, you can basically do it so at your own risk, because I don't know what the state enforces for something like that, or the county has any ordinances for that kind of stuff. I just basically tell them, look, can't do it inside the city limits. Now, with that being said, there's a motor home somewhere at the movie theater that is, you know, same kind of story. I'm just passing through. I'm not here for long term. I'm just gonna get my rest in for the night. And, you know, back in the day when I was on graveyard, it was usually, okay, well, my lieutenant rolls in about 6 o'clock, and if she sees you here, I'm gonna get chewed out, so I need you out of here by 5:30, let's say. And so you just kind of, you know, you let them have that rest period, but you're also believing that they're not there to live or to stay for any period of time. So, you know, it's the nice thing about, you know, enforcement and the discretion that the officer has, that if you're accepting the story that it sounds like it is, oftentimes what we're dealing with is those that just keep whack-a-moling around town. It's the same people, and it's like, oh, I'm not sleeping or I'm not camping. So like, well, I'm contacting you every night, you know, and you don't have a license, you don't have insurance, and you're moving your car around. That's when we get into, you're a nuisance vehicle, and next time we catch you, it's getting towed, so.
And the one of the differences that you talked about, like with the movie theater, that's private property.
But it still violates our ordinance.
Okay. So the other thing is, if we're telling them to move to, get out of the city limits, it probably would be good to do some coordination with the county on, you know, what are the county rules? How do they look at things? I know I've seen people on that turnout out by the relief pitcher, and I'll see the same thing there, you know.
But again, I
But-
don't know that
but
that
the-
was the direction of
yes,
that.
it's tabled on. That's what the county has
I'm
started
not
talking
speaking about people that are
You're
homeless.
just talking about
Yeah,
somebody
people that have
traveling
no place to stay for the
legitimately,
night.
I just need a pit stop for a break to get a couple hours in, and then I'm gonna keep on moving, versus the ones that were
Right.
there for weeks and
And,
weeks on
and the
end.
county has started putting blocks
Right.
up and screening off places so you can't pull over.
Some places. You go down,
It's a big county.
you go, yeah, if you go, for instance, I went south about 5 o'clock in the morning, a few weeks ago. There were, I counted them, there were at least, 15 people parked along the side of the road between here and Garibaldi. And when you go down during the day, there's basically nobody, other than ones you can see or just for the view or whatever, so.
Well, that's why I brought it up, is I didn't wanna name the
Right.
places, but every city has a place almost
Well, I
outside of
don't know
town
if
where they're
the
letting people
city
pull over.
does
Well, they're
that.
telling them
Yeah.
they can't be in town, so they're
I
finding a
think
spot in
people are
between.
just figuring it out on their own. You know, that if the county doesn't come along or the state doesn't come along, then, okay, I think it would be wise to see if the county's done anything about it. I don't remember seeing anything on any of their agendas, so it's probably something just on the side they deal with the sheriff.
And I'm sure the red flags and some of the differences are that the RV is nicely kept and has a current license tab on it versus they're, you know, all full of mold on the outside and don't have current license tabs.
I think the most obvious thing is if they've had frequent contact with the same person. They, you know, that's, if you've never met them before, that's the obvious sign
I
that
think
they're
that's
just going
something
through.
that our police are well aware of and handle well now, so.
And then mentioned previously, with classic community action, managing the camp, we would require some sort of formal weekly check-in conversation. Obviously that would need to be developed, but we hope that they are engaging in those efforts.
So go back, require all dogs in the camping
Oh, I
program
missed that, yeah.
to have proof of current vaccination.
Yeah.
What would happen if they can't give you proof of that?
It wouldn't be eligible for a permit.
They could be cited for being in the city limits in violation of the dog code or animal code.
Okay.
All dogs that are living in town, you, me, anybody else or whatever, has to have
Okay.
proper vaccination, city tag, all that.
Spencer, back to the weekly check-in, I know one issue that Paul's relayed is the ability to know whether a camp has been truly abandoned or if a person's
Yes.
still there. I know he's had problems with that.
Oh, yeah, that is, yeah, he pointed that out, is because they'll leave for a couple days and then come back, and sometimes they don't, so how long do we wait until we clear their site? And so if they're not, if they haven't been there for a certain amount of time, we just clear it.
Is that the story with the one on Avenue B currently?
That, I don't know if that RV's occupied, I believe you guys have tagged it, I think Paul's tagged that for tow.
There's one on V again.
There's always one on V.
There's always one on V. It's the new
Clear
one.
for like a couple of weeks.
But they tag it, what is it, 72 hours, and then we get it brought to our yard typically, and then we wait the waiting period, and when the guys have time, they demolish it. So that's, I don't know if that's an occupied trailer right now, it is tagged for tow, probably getting close to us taking it out of there.
As far as the campers, I think it's very hard. You can be there every single day, and maybe you see Joe day 1 and day 2, and oh, you don't know where Joe is day 3 or day 4, but then suddenly Joe's back on day 5. I think it's really hard to track that.
It shouldn't be if they're checking in with CCA.
Well, that's not a daily check-in that's required.
But CCA is gonna be on site daily.
They're gonna be on site. The current draft we have with them is that they would be out on site at least twice a day.
So it'd be.
Checking, I mean, part of this is
It's
checking
not-
in with
that
people.
is not gonna give them the information. Paul is there every day, and even he doesn't always know when somebody is gone, unless they're gone for a protracted amount of time, and they've just left all their stuff behind. And having CCA pop in and out twice a day, I mean, I think it's a good thing, but on the other hand, I don't think we should expect that they're gonna know everything about every camper all the time, just because they come in twice a day.
Well, it's not that much different than what Paul's having to do. He's in there pretty regularly, but so you get to know who's coming and going and all that.
And they get to know when you are arriving and when you're not there, which means that we're not providing the oversight during periods of time when people are doing bad things in the neighborhood, doing bad things there, and, you know, it's what the neighbors are complaining about. So, you know,
So, 30 is the number for sites, is that
Yeah.
right? Is there any thought to, having the sites numbered in the camp?
I'm sure we'll have some way to
we should.
identify them and assign them.
Because if CCA is, monitoring, it'd probably be nice to know so-and-so is in 15, or
Yeah, they'll have,
they'll have
and
a weekly roster.
we have that already today, we just don't have a good way of designating the sites, so. Yeah, it would be, because they would be assigned to you're in number 3, you're in number 11, or
Yeah,
something like that.
so since it's being built, seems like there could be,
Yeah, for sure.
a way to maybe high up on the fencing or something. that's-
On the eco block, something like that.
Yeah,
And-
those will probably get covered up, though, the eco blocks with tarps or.
I would see maybe, more of the guy wires from things, on the eco blocks. The eco blocks themselves shouldn't be covered. We'll flesh it out. a little bit.
The other thing, and I know, Paul has worked there and has made visits during the day, et cetera. If we're gonna have a contractor, I think we need to provide a respectful place for them to work. We know it rains, we know what the weather can be like, and to ask a contractor to come in and do record keeping, do a lot of different things, and not provide them a place to do that work. I would like to see, at least at Avenue V, when we go there, that we have a pallet office with a bathroom for the staff person, so that they do not have to work out of their car, find a place to go to the bathroom, or share the utilities and commodities with the homeless people there. I think we need to be respectful that we have a contractor.
I think CCA is pretty used to working and probably in their job descriptions of those
I
people
don't think they are.
those people that are out in the field just drive around town and
That's
do that
being
stuff.
out in the field, though. That's not having a regular place to work. I can tell you, you know, at Columbia Inn, you know, they've got an office. They've got their own space separate. It's important to separate staff from
How often are they gonna be there as far as length of time? If they're gonna have a
It just depends, I think, and this is something when we bring back an agreement for the council to consider, we can get, let's hear from CCA on what they believe they need. And we'll find, what does checking in on the camp mean? As Paul will say, you know, it's different every time you go. Sometimes you go, there's nothing to do because either people are out at that particular time or they're sleeping and it's super quiet. Other times there's lots of people milling around and doing stuff, and I would expect at a minimum that they're taking notes on what they're seeing. They're making contact with every person who's there, who's awake and engaging and things like that, and having discussions. You know, checking on for rule violations and things like that. And so I don't know how much work they need to do in an office or something like that, but I think that's where I would rely upon both Paul and CCA to say, okay, what is the work that needs to happen in the camp, and what does the city need to provide to ensure that that happens in the best way for the employees. Keep going here.
So they're basically there to just monitor or help with the rules we set?
Well, they will do whatever we want to contract them for, and the more we contract for, the more it will cost.
Okay.
What we have looked at and have a proposal put together is really to mirror what Paul's doing today, except for at a more regular interval, more frequent and more often. So I think the current one now is 7 days a week, and at least 2 visits to the camp each week. Whereas obviously
day.
Paul only
Each day.
2 each day, 7 days a week, whereas Paul works 5 days a week. So, and I would assume he's in the camp almost every day, but he has other duties as well. And so, yeah.
He's in the
But
camp.
they also, I think, are gonna have a responsibility to engage with, people there to help them engage with services.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main points of contracting with a group like them, is not only can they do what Paul's doing, but they can also take it to the next step where they are the people that get them the services, kind of help navigate them and kind of, they've got the training, to kind of get them where they need to go. And so having them as the front line contact rather than someone from our police department or elsewhere, we think would hopefully increase the likelihood of them finding services and accepting them.
I could see CCA helping them find services and getting them services, but how would they possibly enforce camp rules when they aren't city officials? I mean, would they even be listened to?
We're gonna contract with them, so this isn't, again, we're taking it out of court, so this is just camp rules, and they'd be under contract from the city to enforce our rules.
But just like any business, if they want to trespass somebody, they call the
Yeah,
police
They
department.
don't have to.
They don't have to.
You can trespass them from your property.
Okay.
We've just provided that service, and to be honest with you, we get abused with that
So
service
what will the
sometimes.
backup support be for CCA if they say you are trespassed and the person says, F you?
Right.
So.
That's when we would come if they're having that kind of an issue. And so, again, the rules, you give them the authority to enforce those rules, mark those down. If they got to a point where, hey, they're more than past time to get it, you're out, and they refuse to do that, then we would
Then they
come.
call the
That's
They
gonna
would
cut our
revoke
amount
their
of time that
permit.
we're going there. We would take care of the heavy lift when it comes to violating a city ordinance and or a law versus the rules.
Right, right.
We'll still need to be involved, you know, I'm assuming any of the, I don't know if eviction's the right word, but whatever that process is. Because I imagine many of them are going to be stubborn and problematic about it. We're still gonna be involved in cleanup and stuff like that. I think my goal is that the need for that decreases at the new site because of the improvements there and because of the policies we put in place. I mean, what would be good is that we can shrink the size of the camp and the number of people participating, which leads me to a couple of other things I think go along with this. One is, and we've mentioned this, we want to do a closure of the mill ponds, close it for kind of cleaning and vegetation restoration, prohibit all foot traffic, and trespass violators to have clear signage up there that it's closed for a 12-month period or something like that. That would mitigate the negative impact on some of the neighboring properties. It would cut down on the illegal camping there and on the Land Conservancy's property that's behind ours.
Can I expand on that? So one of the issues I see now is that the campers, even at the Avenue S camp, are cutting through the commons, behind the commons, and they're going to the Nature Conservancy property, I'm assuming is where they are going.
That and the back of mill ponds.
Okay, so one is what enforcement can the Seaside PD provide to people like the Nature Conservancy who have people camping there but don't know how to get them out of there?
So what is their process now? Because we find them there all the time.
Right, they'll call us in and we deal with them, the one that's within that urban growth boundary and all that kind of stuff are still subject to us. And if they're trespassing, we can help deal with that. And so I think they try to, deal with as much as they can before they call us, but we're out there pretty regularly that either a campsite that Paul goes and helps out with or what have you. But if it's already no trespassing if it's their property. And again, it's they can tell them and try to get compliance and get them out of there. But when it comes to the heavy lift of saying, all right, well now you're under arrest because you're refusing to go, then we'll come in and deal with that. If you're talking more about just specifically us doing random patrols out there or whatever, okay.
No, so my concern is if we're more strict with the camp, what it's gonna do, it's gonna push them into mill ponds, it's gonna push them to this nature conservancy. So I'm in favor of temporarily closing mill ponds for that reason, but then I wanna keep them out of the nature conservancy property too, so I think
Do
we're
you,
gonna need to.
do you have to
increase
go
enforcement on
through
it.
the mill ponds to get to the?
No.
Nature Conservancy?
You can
It
do
goes out
that.
behind Ruby's, yeah.
Yeah,
I
there's some
think-
parts of
I
it
think-
you do, but.
I think it will, our hope is that if nothing else, it reduces the amount of people going onto that property.
So even just, if we're just talking Mill Pond, we close it down, how are we gonna keep people out of there? The only way I can think of that you keep people out of there is you put some fencing up.
I'm not sure we're able to
Otherwise-
fence the whole thing, but we would certainly fence,
Yeah, I agree.
put some fencing up like on Alder Mill or something like that, that's an obvious location. After that, I think it's just signage and enforcement, and we determine what the penalties are for entering that area.
Well, there's a big access, along behind Les Schwab that goes to that.
And behind
our
Ruby's.
parking lot.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's something we can completely fence off, so it's
No,
doing
no,
what
I
we
meant just for
can.
signage saying it's closed.
There's a lot of access
Yeah.
points.
Could we try with fencing to keep them from cutting behind across through the commons? So at the camp along Avenue V, so they're not using that path.
Yeah, so one of the things with us putting the fence on the south side of Avenue V, it would make it very difficult and out of the way for them to
Cause they have to
go
come all
back
the way
there.
out to 101.
Especially
and then go
if
back.
the access to, let's say, the recycling yard is completely cut off and fenced off, that's one of the main reasons they're cutting through there now. Next thing, and you saw this in Paul's email, winter camp closure. This is something Paul's talked about and brought up in past years, and I support it in concept, but there's a lot of details that have to be worked out. But basically, as an example, if Helping Hands receives state or county or other funding for, to open up a warming shelter for 90 days, and they have the capacity, we close our camp.
The issue with that is, it's not 90 consecutive days. It's 90 days during the period between November 1st and March something. So they don't do 90 consecutive days.
And that's where we would have to, work out those details with Helping Hands, because yes, it would need, I mean, we're not just gonna send them their way if they're not gonna take them.
Right.
What happens if someone is suspended from their program? I think we'd say you're also suspended from ours or something like that. There's a lot of things that have to be worked out. What happens if they have beds for 15 people and 16 people show up? Does that mean we have to reopen our camp for that one person? There's details that need to get worked out. I think this is more of a, if we can make something like this work, and there is another location they can go, we have no obligation to
But
provide
that
this.
location isn't there every single night of, if we
Well,
close for 90 days.
that's what I'm saying, we'd have to work out with Helping Hands. We have to,
Then that's not a warming shelter then, that's a shelter.
And it's not big enough to house. I mean, there's not enough
30
facility there to
people?
house the campers. we
but
have.
part of this could be if,
But a lot
if,
of campers won't go there because they don't want to.
and I
They
think,
don't wanna comply.
and I think that's just it. If there is a bed available and they're like, I don't like that place, I don't want to go there, we don't have an obligation to provide something.
Right.
So again,
That's correct.
that's the goal of what we're getting to, is this, there isn't a right to be in this camp. We have an obligation to provide you something if nothing else is available, but the purpose of this is taking advantage of either closing the camp or removing people who have other options and turn them down.
And then what we have to realize is if they don't want, if we've closed it down for 90 days, and I'm not against that, and they don't want to go to Helping Hands, then we're not obligated to give them a place, but they will go someplace else in town.
And that's where, I think, as we look at, if we think we're gonna be doing this for a long period, I think our resources are better spent on enforcing the camping regulations outside of the camp than putting a lot of into the camp itself, meaning we have reasonable camping rules that everyone needs to abide by. And if you can't abide by them, we are no longer obligated to provide you a space. And any resources, when I say resources, any employees we need to help with this are the ones outside of the camp, ensuring that those who get suspended from the camp are enforcing that elsewhere. So that would look like, to me, like things like daily check-ins at the regular places. So if someone has an established camp, we have to give them 72 hours. But let's say we define an established camp as someone who has been in the same location for 72 hours. If we had an officer dedicated to this who checked all the usual spots every other day, they could never claim that I've established a camp here, and we could remove them at that time and not give them time.
We're just playing a bigger game of whack-a-mole.
It absolutely is.
And without the ability still, I mean, we're saying if they're in the camp, we're gonna have our own way of giving them demerits, whatever. But if they're caught camping at the end of Avenue D, what? Are you gonna do the citation and go through the whole court thing again, which we already know?
One thing would be, is if they're found in any like public property, like our parks, we trespass them from that location. Again, you're right, it just becomes the whack-a-mole. But I think that is better than just having a camp where people can just be here for the next 20 years or something like that. And I was gonna turn it over to Jeff in Beaverton. They had a program like this. Do you wanna talk a little bit about your prior experience?
It was essentially their bicycle team, that's all they did, is hit the regular places on a daily basis to work with not only the campers to get them into services, but also with the private property owners to make the properties less attractive for the establishment of camps. And sometimes that involved limbing up of trees, and some of them were denser areas. Sometimes that involved fencing. Sometimes that involved the property owner actually taking responsibility for their property and helping law enforcement out by reporting camps that ended up there.
It sounds like it was
But
successful.
it's labor intensive. And since COVID, that team went from, I think, 2 officers, now it's up to 7 and a supervisor. So it's labor intensive.
And so I just go back to, if we need extra staff to deal with homeless camping, I think the method of prioritizing enforcement outside the camp is going to reduce the number of people in our camp. If all the emphasis were internal to the camp, and we were much more lenient on the rules and policies, what I see happening is it continued to grow, or just people never leaving. And again, everything that we're trying to do is incentivize them getting the help that's being provided to them, as opposed to this is their new permanent living conditions.
The bottom line we also have to acknowledge is that you can have people living in the camp who have a job, who are trying to work a program, who are looking for a place to live, and there's just no damn place to live.
And I think the goal here would be, typically those aren't the ones we have problems with in the camp.
I agree.
And they are going to be the first ones that the service providers will probably, when openings happen, that they'll get them into, because they're the most likely to be successful. I think it's the chronic, I am choosing to live my life where I just get high in my tent and have things provided to me. I just don't think that we need to be enabling that. if that's a choice they're making, we're not gonna enable them, and they're not eligible to be on our program.
And unfortunately, we also know that there are several families in town who just dump their son or daughter in our camp. I mean, I can remember, I don't know if he's still there, there was one young man that every time that was time to clean the camp, his father would come and pick him up and take him away for the day, and at 4 o'clock that afternoon, his father brought him back.
And that's where I would hope our advocates and other service providers can have the time and the expertise to work on those things to see if there are options and things like that. Last thing on here, new regulations outside of camp. So one of the things that we need to do with the next ordinance is provide our own definition of an established camp. I believe the state's law says that we get to make that determination. I'm sure our attorneys have some guidance on that. Because there's a lot of things that trigger when a camp becomes established. It limits what we can do, or puts requirements on noticing and how long, like the 72 hours. And so we need to define that so that we can then work within that definition to curb unauthorized camping sooner and abate it sooner than later. Again, I mentioned the citywide park hours, and then if people are found camping illegally, let's say someone's in Cartwright Park is found camping, is that we can trespass them from that camp, and if they're found there again, we have more options on what we can do other than just take them out of the camp.
A couple of notes I had written for myself here, not to forget. I would suggest we try for the opening of the Avenue B camp to coincide with the end of that 90-day closure period. So we don't close for 90 days, take them back to S, and then move them to V.
Yeah, I think our goal is to get it open as soon as possible, to lessen the effects on
Yeah, but we were hearing
S.
6 months. That's what we heard.
Well, that's an estimate. The real answer is as soon as the contractors can finish the work.
Right. And the other thing I didn't see anywhere in here is security lights and security cameras.
Yeah, those aren't camp policies or camp rules. That's what we've been talking about. The site discussion we've had have all included that.
I'd like to see those installed at S immediately as we can, because those are deterrents. I don't know if you're aware, but I got a call from Dave Kohler, and all their security cameras got stolen. Now, the assumption you can make, but you don't know, because it's not like we can say, oh, let's look at the footage on the camera, because the camera's gone.
I think, and I was aware of that. I think part of that, though, goes to show for a lot of people claiming that security cameras are the answer,
Right.
they're not.
But some of it has to do with what kind of cameras do you have, how far up do you put
So
them?
On the cameras.
we can look at that. I'll just say the work we put into that is work we're not doing at the permit site.
On the cameras at the new site, what would be good is to have them overlap, so there's cross coverage.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we
So
have-
if someone vandalizes a camera, you can clearly see who's doing it, as opposed to just have camera cover this area, and then they're just gonna be able to.
I think our plan right now is 4 cameras that would overlap, have different perspectives, but also I think we want to, make them as tough as possible or as inaccessible as possible.
And one maybe on that access, so you can see who's
I agree
clearly
with
coming.
you.
Yeah, I think we have
Mhm.
right now 2 on Avenue V, and then 1 on the entrance, and then 1 on the east side of the camp. That gives us all of that.
But I really don't want to see us ignore Avenue S right now. I mean, we know that there's problems there.
So that's the next slide that I was gonna talk to you about, what we want to do.
Before we move on,
Yep.
I just want to reiterate my desire to have this new site moved further to the east into the Public Works. I know the council didn't seem to like that idea, but I want to provide as big a buffer as possible to the businesses and have it not border any private property, and then of course as much shrubbery and barrier as we could possibly.
Yeah, I've got that later in the presentation when we talk about the site. Okay, so immediate actions to alleviate some of the concerns on Avenue S is begin the monthly move outs now, where we give them several days notice, and then give Public Works sufficient time to clean up that site. In order to do that, we would probably need to move them across the street to the Alder Mill property. We can't do that yet because there isn't fencing between our property and the other businesses, so we would want to install some temporary fence to protect those neighbors. But again, starting the regular move outs and cleanups now will prepare them for that.
So am
that
I
public works
understanding
site.
you're saying, unlike in the past, when we said move out, and they had to move somewhere, you're saying move out and here's where you move out to while you're waiting for us to clean everything?
So in the past, there are two things have happened. One is sometimes they just drag all their stuff to the street. But when we were doing the more frequent move outs between say 9 and 4, drag everything to the street, sit there with their stuff till 4 o'clock, then drag it all back in. I believe what they've been doing more recently with some of the selective cleanouts where it's site specific, these people are out, is they've gone into that Alder Mill site, spray painted a big box and say, this is where you can keep your stuff while we're out of the camp. So we give them a little bit more time to clear their stuff out. So if they wanted to work on it for a day or two before, they could do that, and then they would move in afterwards. And so something similar to that, we'd give them a location so they're not just sitting on the street, on the sidewalk, on the curb. They'd be on that property, better there than elsewhere, while it's cleaned up, and then move them back as soon as the site's cleaned up. But it's not always as fast as we'd like it to be.
And will there be detail in the contract with CCA as to what's CCA's responsibility during a move out?
Yeah, that would address that. Currently, the language as drafted is they coordinate cleanups, but they're not the ones out there doing the cleanup. But they are coordinating between Public Works, police, and the campers themselves.
I think that kind of coordination certainly requires being there more than twice a day.
Yeah, it's gonna take whatever it takes. I think what we're currently anticipating in the contract is for 20 hours a week. If they are there twice a day, let's say it's an hour each time, that's 14 hours. That's still 6 hours a week for any other administrative purposes for the camp. And talking with Paul, he says that's more than generous. So one of the things we've also considered is the process to build an eco-block is those are typically, the reason they're cheap is because they're usually the spoils left over from other construction sites. So it's not like we can just go and order 100 eco-blocks. They're constructed as the materials come in, and so we need to start purchasing some now. And so one of the ideas is to potentially, as we think we can do it, start putting some of those in at the current Avenue S site to delineate space. It may be that in order to do that, we have to have some of the campers on the new Alder Mill property. But I think if we can get the eco blocks in, and it does prove that we are more successful in keeping them accountable to their areas, I think that would be a good trade-off in order to basically start doing that as soon as we can, rather than waiting for the Public Works site.
I'm not understanding where the temporary fence would be. So not on the back at all, but only along the entire front?
I know, Jeff, do you want to talk about that, or Ed?
On Aldermill, the new
Yeah.
property,
Yeah.
it would need to separate the camp from the adjacent building to the north and a property to the west. So we would need just an L-shaped temporary fence at that point.
Yeah,
The property to the south is ours. So.
It would go away once B was open, right?
Yeah, and I think, Ed and I were talking, it's kind of like construction fencing, 6 to 7 feet tall, that's not permanently set in the ground.
And then since you're addressing some of the issues, to, you know, to get us held over until we get the move made, why can't we stop with the vehicles now and lock that gate?
There's no reason we couldn't do that.
Wouldn't that help a lot of the traffic in and out, because
I don't think, the two, oh, you mean the vehicles, are you talking about the vehicles?
pulling, driving in and out of there?
Well, they're not going in and out of the camp, they are parking.
No, I mean, out of the
They're going into
mill
Mill
pond
Pond.
area.
Oh,
where
for the people that are part of our camping program, you mean?
Right,
Other-
apparently there's two, but I
There's
see
two.
other cars come and go in there.
Yeah, I think if we wanted to start the closure of mill ponds, we could do that at any time, including during this transition time to the public works site.
I think having that gate locked and closed would help with a lot of this traffic. We're talking about foot traffic behind the commons, and make it less, maybe less advantageous to get into the mill ponds.
And block off that, there's a way you can go around the fence. You know, if your gate's closed, there's a little path around the fence over here. You wanna make sure and block
Yeah, I
that.
think we'll want to do as much as we can to close it off, obviously on the west side of the mill ponds. There's gonna be plenty, but, we'll do whatever we can to.
I mean, I think it would go a
there.
long ways to helping the residents that are on Avenue S and, you know, just cut down some of that traffic, because we know there's cars pulling in all times of the night and.
Well, I think that's the other thing we can do is, I think we can review, what signage is out there for no parking on Alder Mill and on S. And, signage is easy, so we could get some signage up if that's what's needed, and then look at, enforcement as well. Cause we do have quite a few, both people that should be in the camp, but also we have, you know, the people providing meals that will just park illegally on the street and stuff like that, and so.
Have we removed the utilities from the mill pond? There was a big dumpster there, there was a porta potty there,
Some of
there
that
was water.
is still there because we have the vehicle campers.
Okay, so when we remove the vehicle campers,
That would
we pull
go
that out
away.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah, especially for closing the mill ponds,
Yes.
there's no need for those.
Yes.
Okay, let me jump into, is there,
I like
Oh,
the
sorry.
idea, by the way, of striping each move out, so the
Striping,
sites are delineated.
yeah.
Or using blocks.
or if we can use blocks, that would be the preference too.
Mhm.
Yeah, so striping, and then the other thing is getting CCA under contract sooner rather than later. I think they're, last time I talked to Viviana, I mean, they're anxious to go, and so I think the next item, if we think we're on the same page for what we want to do, is for us to bring back a draft to the city council to discuss and have CCA here with us and kind of work out those details.
What does that bullet said mean? Camp has been without advocates for 7 months.
So, when we first established our camp, we had regular outreach from CCA and others. And in fact, I think the person assigned to our area from CCA was a really good advocate. I don't know, do you remember what her name was?
Cheryl originally.
Yeah, and then I think she got replaced now.
So we had really good, I think, you know, people left, and Paul doesn't recall seeing any of the advocates being in the camp for about that amount of
Is the law not coming
time.
down anymore, or
I
CBH?
believe Bob is.
Okay.
And Paul would say that has contributed to some of the conditions there has been less outreach. And I don't know if that is due to staffing issues at CCA, which I know they have, if that is, they've been reallocated elsewhere to other programs, or like the Columbia Inn or something like that. I think that's a discussion that we have, but certainly when we have those conversations with CCA, we want to establish what the expectations are.
I know that there's been a general sense, I've seen this in Facebook and other places, where can I take this extra clothes I have, or where can I take this food? And people saying, oh, take it down to the camp. And there's a lot of other places to funnel it better.
Absolutely.
And so even in our signage, if we say, do not leave food or clothing or tents here, and even with the suggestion, you can take it, one place that takes it is Sunday supper. There's you can take it to the food bank. There's other places, because that just adds to, in many cases, the trash.
Well, many of them, as it's kind of obvious, have hoarding tendencies and whatnot. And so
Yes.
if they're offered something, they will take it. So we need to curb both the giving of that and the storing of that.
You said large pieces of furniture. The other thing you should say is you can't have any non-working appliances. I will never forget the person who had the wall of microwaves. Yeah, because people kept dropping off their microwaves.
Well, and that would be something under the new rules, that it'd have to be inside their tent anyways. So we may not necessarily know, but certainly we can add that to the rules. I mean, I think at one point we said, actually, I don't think I put this in here. I think we said
Yes, but a couple of campers have gone out and bought generators.
batteries, yeah.
Mhm.
I think the other thing was, I think we just said no bike parts. You can have a bike, but you don't need bike parts.
Yeah, you can't
There's not as
conduct
much
a bike
bike
repair
maintenance
business.
happening in the camp as you'd be led to believe by the number of bike parts that are there. So let's talk a little bit about the details of the site. So this was the site that we most recently talked to the council about. And so staff, we're on site. I've got some pictures here specifically to address Councilor Morrissey's desire to push it as far east as we can. And I'd encourage you to go out there and look at the site. And if you want a time for us to meet you out there, we can do that. Just out there. So Jeff went out and took some pictures today. This is the site. This is the view of the camp if you were standing on the deck of the northeastern building at the Commons. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah,
So this is the view from
my
the
pole
deck.
camera goes up about 5 feet or so and can take a picture.
So clearly, this is the part that's visible right here. One thing that you'll see, and I'll have some pictures later, but you don't need to go back very far, and it's pretty thick and tall trees and vegetation that blocks all of the view. So it's this narrow corridor that we want to block. It's like I changed it didn't change there. There we go. This is if you're on the path in the mill ponds at the site, so already the difference between being on a back porch and the path is significant, just with I think there's blackberry bushes and other vegetation that grows up. This is the view from the corner of our lot looking towards the Commons. Again, a pretty good indication of much of it is already out of view, but there is some. And so it's really the northernmost 3 buildings where those back porches have a view. But again, all of this vegetation blocks out everything in here. So it's really this narrow window in here that we need to, that is visible. There's also quite a bit of trees and vegetation right there. The only other thing is these units right here all have like an upstairs bedroom. They have one window up there, but I think there's a big difference between those windows, which are probably more ventilation, let the sun in, and an egress for an emergency. But I don't think they're meant for sitting at the window your whole vacation, like a back porch is. So the emphasis being on cutting off that view. Again, this was a picture I took last week. So again, There are those bedroom windows on the north side of the Commons property. But it's really those 3 units right there with those back porches. And so as we discussed things, we were brainstorming ways to screen our camp from that view. And so this is my rudimentary kind of, if we were able to screen this area, that would prevent those 3 northeastern units from seeing the camp. But that's about the area. Once you get into the into the vegetation, it's tall enough, it's thick enough that you can't really see through it. And so as we've contemplated that,
Would that be like a 20-foot screen?
I don't know about 20 feet. So we have the fence that's right now scoped out as 8 feet, and we could add screening to that fence so you couldn't see that. That was one of the reasons to, in the camp policies, say you can't have anything higher than 8 feet. The one thing is there is some slope here where it's coming down towards the water, and so if this is 8 feet, you would be able to potentially see some of the tents up there. And so one thing we've talked about even just today is, what other fencing or screening is possible. The other thing we've talked about is potentially, instead of just a screen fence, bringing in a shipping container and putting it there. That would block everything out. We need to have a secure place to keep possessions for 30 days. So we could use that for that purpose. We could also start with 1. We'll probably start with 2 if you were to do that. Put 1 right here and 1 right here, and that would bridge that gap. You really wouldn't be able to see it. It'd just be the over. And then depending on what those sight lines look like, if needed, we could also put another one. We could have them go too high or something like that. And that would completely block it out. We did look at moving it further east. There's only so far we can go. As an example, we don't think we can move this. That's our dump site, and we don't think any of that would be permitted today from DEQ if we were to move it. So we could probably get, maybe 20 or 40 feet. However, it's all area that is used heavily by public works. So what we tried to do is, we didn't think the extra 40 feet bought us much. And so what we tried to do is come up with ways to screen it so that it's not visible. It's still quite a good separation. Some of that would still be a good sound barrier as well. And as we thought about the impact on the neighbors, we've heard quite a few concerns raised by the Commons, but also by the owner of Truckies and the other neighbor here. And ultimately, I think their concern, while it is a concern that their people may see the camp, I think the greater concern is just having homeless people kind of milling around and close to the site and things like that. And so, anyways, our approach was to do what we thought was reasonable, that we could reasonably screen it all out, but still preserve the space that Public Works needs to operate. And so we have a little bit more room. If you want to advance to, John.
What is
Go one
the
more.
dimension of a container?
The last slide. It's
Going
after the
up?
conclusion.
I kind of like that
They're
idea.
like 8 feet, so it's the same
All
size.
right.
We can get what, 20 footers?
2 more?
30 footers?
Well, there's the
There's
width,
one after the
but
conclusion.
I'm thinking how
They're
high.
There we go. Oh, you missed it. Too far. Go back. That was it. Nope. Stop on that one.
Oh, this one, okay.
So as an example, this is what an idea of the shipping containers. This one did push it back a little bit. about as far as we could go as Ed went out and measured things. And it does push it a little bit back, but I think the more important thing was just getting the screening in there. And then, again, I mean, ideally, we would like to see this camp shrink quite a bit. And if we're able to do that, again, just like other properties we've purchased, we can find uses for those storage containers. We've also talked about, do we plant bamboo or something like that that grows high? And I mean, I think we want to do anything we can to cut the noise, cut the visual. With all that being said, we still want this to be completely open because
I would still like to see something planted on the south side of those containers that will eventually grow.
yeah.
That's a good.
Yeah, I mean, a shipping container is not also your favorite neighbor, but it's better than
And
the
I'm
alternative.
assuming if they go in, like, they would be painted green on that side or something.
We would maybe
Sure.
try to blend as best as possible or be the least noticeable or something like that.
And if you use that for storage, that you would have, I mean, it would give you that spot for storage, and it might even give you a place to have an office.
I've seen lots of amazing things they do with shipping containers these
Yeah.
days. With all that said, that's everything we've been working on for the last week, and I know we've got a lot of feedback, but we're happy to take any more feedback. And if we're going in the right direction, I've already instructed Ed to start on the, there's a lot of work to do to get the projects lined up. I'll be working on a new ordinance and policies to bring back for adoption, to have a thorough review from our new attorneys, bringing back a contract with lots of community action and having a conversation between the city council and CCA. And I guess that's where I feel we are today, but continue to look for your direction and feedback as a council.
So given the topography, that's as far as you're saying it could really move without kind of choking out that end and getting into the trash pile. And
We've got to be able to back up large vehicles to that west side. They dump, our landscapers that work contract for the city to dump a lot of yard debris back there, and so do we. So we've got to be able to have room to maneuver to get in and out of that area, and we're not going to be able to, the way the elevations are of that trash area, we're not going to be able to recreate that anywhere on the site.
yeah, I appreciate you guys at least attempting to move it a bit. And I think those shipping containers will be good in the sense, not just the noise barrier that they'll provide, which is great. So I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, but also, what's going to be really helpful is just having the Mill Ponds Park site closed for a year. I mean, I would think with that gate being locked that goes onto Alder Avenue out of the Mill Ponds, and have the ponds closed, that's going to cut a lot of the traffic, foot traffic.
Yeah, how are we gonna prevent people from taking that path and coming behind the commons? Is there anything we can do there?
Do you want to come up here and show us what you
Just
mean?
the path.
I think that
Yeah, right
path
there.
may be on the commons, not that.
So where the path
So
goes
I
is
think,
to
I think
Alder
that's
Mill.
where, I think that's where we go to a closure, that's where we need to put signage that the park is closed.
I mean,
Anyone,
from the other side, from this side, to come this way, because I understand we can close the Mill Ponds gate, but how are we
when
gonna?
I say closed, I mean all along here, we're just have to put up signage that says, this park is closed, anyone found here is subject to being trespassed, or it's a violation of something like that. But that's really the most we can do. But again, I think a lot of the traffic now is cut through to the Alder Mill site. And that's one where we do have more control to close it off. And so, I mean, yeah, people are still gonna go in there, but when they realize they no longer can cut through to Alder Mill, I think some of that behavior gets curbed. And so it's just people going into the Mill Ponds itself or into the Land Conservancy area. And that's where we just need to go to signage, so it's obvious that they were on notice that they can't be there, and when they're found there, having the police deal with it.
And we immediately doing away with the vehicle accommodation.
I think, we can as soon as we, get, policies back, to you to approve. So I'll start working on those. And I'll look at the language. If the language,
You know.
if the
even-
language isn't explicit to say that we are required to provide that, if it's discretionary on us, and that's what we're proposing to do anyways, we can close it down sooner than later. I think the only issue would be if we have 30 sites and 30 sites are full, and we have 2 vehicle campers, and we say you can't camp here, what I'd prefer is that we have a spot, you can't camp here, but if you want, you can set up a tent over here. So it may be something more like, as a site becomes available, then we go to one of the car campers and say, okay, we're changing your permit to you're allowed to park in the camp, but basically wait for an opening, give them their offering and say, but you have to leave. And if they take it, great. If they don't take it and leave, go somewhere else, then we make the offer to the last person. But basically there's a process to
And
move
they've
them out
got-
without giving them permission to camp anywhere.
And they've gotta find someplace to go park that RV or trailer or whatever it is that's not in the camp.
Correct.
Yep. Don?
I recall earlier talking about Avenue V and putting a fence along it that would discourage people from going around the fence and going into the mill ponds.
Do you wanna go back to the?
Yeah, I didn't put that fence on there, and
So,
we had discussed that.
Right here, this would be fencing from here all the way to the
Yeah.
highway on
Because
both
you
sides.
were talking about making it so vehicles could be parked in here
So we backed off of the idea of having vehicles parked in here,
Okay.
with the exception of a few designated spots for authorized service providers.
Okay.
But we fenced both sides off, probably have a gate here so the truckies RV park,
Okay,
they can pull
so
out.
that way we don't have someone blazing a new path through the black.
Yeah, that's exactly it, is right now, they cut, all day long they're cutting through here. So by fencing this entirely off, if you do wanna violate the rules, you've gotta walk all the way out here and then come all the way back into here. And again, if we've closed it,
How
hopefully.
wide is Avenue B?
I think the right of way is 40 foot.
And,
Check.
And that's
the
why
tree
you-
line, on the RV park there, how far is that set off of?
The tree line where the containers are on that.
No, where the RV park is.
Do you wanna go back, John, to my slide with a little, that shows like, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, these right here, we anticipate having some of our campers right here, and their RVs come right up to here, don't they?
There is
All
one
the
in
way.
that corner, yeah. But, so my question is, the street right away, it'd be nice to see exactly where that runs. You know,
I'll show you if I
cut
can
off
cast
part
it
of
there.
this, do all these trees stay?
Yeah, I think more of the, you wanna throw
Or
yours
is it
up?
like this, does the road actually come down to here?
I think it definitely goes more to the south, but I'll let Jeff preempt my slide and pull something up.
He can put it, I can move it over there. Hold on.
Oh yeah, this isn't my device.
How come the truckies
Up there.
lane is marked Avenue B on that map?
I know.
Oh, so it's at an angle, huh?
Yeah.
Oh,
It actually might be wider than 40 feet. We'll measure it. Yeah, it's right at about 40 feet.
So again, I think as much, we don't wanna remove anything that's
No,
gonna be
I-
screening.
I like the fact that the trees would stay.
But on the south side, I think that's mostly blackberries.
Yeah.
We do need to widen the street to the full right of way so it can be utilized.
Yeah.
However, we can look at this. Originally, we were talking about on-street parking on Avenue V. If we're gonna prohibit pretty much all parking, we can revisit how much we want to widen it. Cause again, and that's all work that needs to be done. Maybe there's reasons we do want to do it in any case. We can review that as we are
Maybe it doesn't
finalizing
have
it.
to be done before the rest of the project.
Yeah, or maybe it doesn't need to be the full width. I think one of the things I want to do, my intention of keeping it wide though, is just for as much as we want to screen this, we also want it to be as visible as possible to our public safety officers.
Exactly.
You know, especially if there's lights on and other things like that, we want to make it
One of the
easier
first
for them to
things-
enforce.
One of the first things we're gonna have to do is survey all this property so that we know where our boundaries are. And once we have those survey markers on the ground, it'll give us a better idea of what our elevations are, because I can tell you that south corner of Avenue V right away right there is elevated quite a bit
Yeah.
compared to where actually Avenue V sits. We're gonna have to move some dirt both sides of the right of way in order to widen that and then bring the elevation of the camp so it flows. We don't want it to be perfectly flat, 'cause we want water to run off, but it needs to be flat enough that it's campable and not an issue for the people staying there. So once we know our property boundaries, we'll have a little better idea of what the site is gonna look like and what elevations we'll have.
And, you know, again, going back to CCA being there twice a day, and I don't know what kind of presence Paul has or our police department have on Avenue S camp at night or after dark. And I don't know what we are planning for the Avenue V, because it would seem to me that that might be when the most mischief could occur.
I'll let the chief answer. My first response is I think the proposed plans will be easier to control, even to the fact that I think, let me back up and say, when I was on the site for a meeting last week, it's a lot bigger than I was expecting than it looks on the paper, which means each camper will have a little bit more space, and so they should be able to more peacefully live with their neighbors, but also I think keeping it clean, but also it's a pretty wide driveway, so it should be nothing for a patrol officer to drive in, do a loop around, and come back out. What's the drive lane in there? Is it 20 feet? Jeff?
17 on this new layout, 17 on each side with area to turn around.
So, which is pretty wide, so I think we want, again, make it as easy as possible for patrol when they are not on other calls, you know, to be,
I really
this
like
is
that.
a frequent stop.
I like that idea. And the other great thing about this is there's nobody, I mean, they're not too deep, or side by side. Like in the current camp, you can't walk between them because they're butted up to each other.
Yeah, it makes it really hard for us to clean up the camp that's behind the other
Yeah.
camp.
And is there anything, is it possible that in the rules kind of thing, we're saying you have to keep everything inside your tent, you can't do this? Is there anything where we can say there's a requirement that you keep your area presentable, clean?
I think our best bet there is, especially with this population, is we have to be as specific as possible.
Yes,
Because
yes.
they're not gonna have the same definition of keeping it clean or neat or something like that.
No,
So
I agree.
I think that's what we've tried to do, is this is what you can have inside, this is what you can't have outside. And I will say, at some point we were even talking about, as long as they keep it inside, how much do we care? And what we've discovered in our camp in recent cleanouts is, there are all the problems we expected when we cleaned out some of those pallets, finding the rats and things underneath. And so we do care what's happening in the site, so we want to keep it discourage anything that would bring in rats or any other kind of unsanitary conditions.
And right now, we also have at least one group of people that are bringing food in every single day and feeding.
Do you want to go back to the map there, Jeff? So, the way I'm drafting this, and again, this will be your policy, so you get to decide what you want. Only authorized people can be anywhere in here, and along here. Coming in here, we may have to see what our attorneys say, what we can do, but the intent is, you're only even coming down here if you are a city employee, an authorized service provider, or someone with a camping permit. And so for those who want to bring meals, we can't stop them, they can do that, but they will need to find private property around here, a partner that wants to do that. But we won't necessarily be providing the spot. And while that may seem harsh, as we've talked to the experts in this area, again, sometimes those things that have the best intentions end up just enabling the behavior we don't want, because I don't need to leave my tent and I get, front door service for food and stuff like that. And so again, our purpose is to incentivize people to take the help when it's offered.
And I would imagine that Avenue V would have some kind of signage that says permitted parking only and no parking between this hour and this hour.
Well, I think we could stripe it or sign it so it's
Parking without a permit essentially is the way it's gonna be.
Ah, okay.
But
that's
also
good.
if we make it a fire lane, the fines are increased. We can look at other things like, we haven't explored this, but could we have contract with a towing company to, hey, anyone in there without a permit is towed? I mean, we'll look at anything we can do to enforce it.
Oh, I was just gonna, I lost it, but it's.
I mentioned, last Monday night that I've been following what's happening across the state and talking with other mayors. And the consensus is you're moving towards things that are more strict and more rules for people to follow. Because the Supreme Court really didn't give us any guidance and the state hasn't either, so we're just caught in the middle. And as long as we stay with, reasonable, we think we're okay. I like the thoroughness of what you've done here. And, I look forward to seeing what you come up with, both in the whatever ordinance changes, which hopefully should be minimal because most of what we've done is via policy. But, we're gonna have more work sessions and those will be the subjects until we get ready to pass the final one. I agree with, maybe trying to coordinate it so that we end up with no more vehicle camping at the same time we're ready to close the mill ponds. And we should let people know, as best as possible that we're doing it for the health of the mill ponds itself. It really needs a rest.
Can we just stop permitting vehicles? We've got 2 there now, just don't permit any more?
Yeah, I think if that's an option, we can do that. I think the answer is yes.
Policy, because I think the policy specifically allows it.
Well, and that's what I'll review, but if there's discretion on my part, the nice thing is, the reason we have the policy is it's easier to change. So we can bring back that sooner, if the ordinance needs to take longer. I suspect we're gonna need an ordinance update. Our current attorneys, they've reviewed it, but they weren't involved in drafting it. And I'm sure, given the opportunity, there's some probably good changes, and lots happened in 2 years, and we can find the best practices from other communities and put that together. But if we're gonna have a policy in the future ordinance, we can get going on that right away.
Pretty sure there's another update or session at the conference about
There
this.
is.
So that'll be another chance, and that's only 30 days away, so
It's
we're
Friday
still
morning.
working on all this stuff. I think it's just time to do something. We need to do it, move forward.
Yeah, I think, as we've talked about it, I think more and more cities are, like you mentioned, Mayor, kind of looking at a stricter enforcement and rules. And what we've talked about this last week is, we don't want to be the last ones doing that. So as other communities get stricter, we don't want to become the destination for those people who don't want to abide by stricter rules elsewhere.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was a good 2 hours spent, I think. And I think we have a better idea what's going on. Have fun.
To follow up, a couple of notes. Our council meeting next Monday is pretty short. I am gonna be out of town at my conference, so John will be leading it on my behalf. I think the biggest issue, I don't want to say an issue, we have a work session with an applicant that wants to do a street vacation. You'll get all the details in the staff report. And then staff, in our effort to try to start solidifying all the old handshake deals and stuff like that, is we have a proposed lease for the Chamber of Commerce that spells out their use of the building and our use, who pays for what, and basically how we're operating today, but let's get it in a lease term. That's on there. And the last thing I'd add, I sent an email, I believe on Friday, and I figured while we're all here, we'll get an answer. I think Councilor Frank responded about, we currently have a meeting scheduled November 11th, which is Veterans Day. I know, Tia, you brought it up.
Yeah.
Oh, you responded. So our recommendation is to just bump it to the next day till Tuesday, or to bump it to the following Monday. But I think our preference was, both for the council president and for the mayor and staff, was just move it back one day, so it'd be November 12th.
I think I responded that that was fine with me, so.
Check the charter. Charter allows us to have, requires us to have one meeting a month at minimum. So our second November meeting would meet that. We can hold special meetings at other times, and that's what this could be. We could say we're canceling the November 11th meeting and holding a council meeting on the 12th.
Special meeting on the 12th.
Yeah.
And if there is nothing on the agenda, we can easily cancel it. However, with everything that's going on, I don't see that as a high likelihood, so don't hold your breath.
That will be after the election, and we'll have an idea whether we've got to do time, matter, and place for psilocybin. The county is going ahead with it, by the way, so.
So, were you looking at your calendar? Does 12th work?
Looking at some things, yeah, that should be fine.
Okay. Any other concerns from anyone else?
Spencer, I can add real quick on the, getting the application process set up for Ward 1. I did hear back from our vendor today, because we're trying to move that electronically for ease in operations, and she feels pretty confident we can get that up by the end of the week. So we're shooting for that. If not, I think worst case scenario is next Monday.
And then we're still looking to each one of us to send you some questions for the in-person interview, right?
Yeah.
So, if we can't talk about this now, that would be fine with me, but I'm curious about this email that we all got today about the fees and charges supposedly for the sandcastle event on the beach. I didn't understand everything that was being aired there, except that.
So my understanding is there was what was it called? Sandcastle? Sandfest. And in the past, it's been free, but there've been donations accepted or something like that.
It's a private group that does it.
And this year, they decided to close the event to just their use. No different than Hood to Coast or volleyball or something, where they have selected areas where you can't go in if you're not paying or whatnot. So they did that here, and my understanding was, if you're on the outside, you're welcome to look in. If you want to go inside, you need to pay for that. And that particular resident, I'm guessing, either had come in the past and been able to see it for free.
It wasn't a resident.
Or visitor, sorry. A visitor had either come and seen it before and was upset, or just didn't think that some private events should be held. So I was talking to Kim earlier. We're going to prepare a response just saying, look, people can book private events on the beach, and it happens. We have weddings and things like that. And then also, you know, it wasn't a city event, but we did issue the permit because it met all of our guidelines, and the state parks division is the one that issued ultimately the permit to do that on the beach.
So what confused me was the business that they said that they were told by first that the state parks was charging the group to be there, and then that the
Just
city
a permit,
on
just
top of it
dollars.
was charging.
No.
And I didn't think we had anything to do with any kind of charges for that.
The only time we charge events is when there's direct services they need, when they need road
Right.
closures, police or fire presence, public works, things like
So
that.
basically,
But we don't even charge an application
they were
fee.
told the wrong thing by the
Whoever they talked to.
event people.
I think we
Okay.
metered their water, right?
Yeah, we metered their water.
So any water they use, it was hooked to our city
And they-
supply,
So they
was
have to pay for
metered,
that.
so they have.
They
to
do
pay
use a
for it,
lot of
just
water.
like-
Okay, well.
Just like hood to coast, just like soccer in the
Yeah.
sand, just like volleyball, they all check out a meter, and then we meter the water that they use, and hook it up for
Okay,
them.
and that makes sense. So,
Okay.
she also thought it was okay. with the
Just make